Hi, everyone, and welcome to AltaSea's Project Blue at Home's live chat with Dr. Greg Stone. This is part of a series of live chats that AltaSea's has been hosting and putting on. You can find all of the recorded ones in this one after we're done at altasea-project-blue.org. I'll be putting the live chat. I'll be putting the link to this in the live chat so that it's easier for everyone. And if there's any high schoolers or high school parents watching this and they're looking for something to do in the summer, AltaSea is hosting a high school volunteer research program. Its partners, Oregon State University, the National History Museum, and Holdfast Aquaculture will serve as mentors to 12 high school students as they conduct research in ocean energy, ocean exploration, and or sustainable aquaculture. They will be able to earn volunteer hours, and it will be a great boost to your college applications. So if there are any high schoolers in there, high school parents that want their kids to be involved, please apply. The applications are due this Sunday at 5 p.m. Look to the AltaSea Project Blue website, which will be in the chat box below for the applications. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest today. It's Dr. Greg Stone. He's a prolific author. He's published hundreds of scientific articles and 4 books. He's appeared on documentaries for Discovery, National Geographic, TED Talks, and many, many more. Dr. Greg Stone currently serves as Chief Ocean Scientist for Deep Green Resources and is the co-founder and chair of the nonprofit Pole to Pole Conservation, focusing on ocean conservation, indigenous rights, communications, and climate adaptation. If you have any questions during this presentation by Dr. Greg Stone, please ask them in the chat. We will have time at the end for a Q&A session. So please ask away. With that, Dr. Greg Stone, thanks for joining us today. We're excited to hear your thoughts on the topic. Will the COVID-19 crisis lead to an ocean renaissance? And with that, Dr. Greg Stone, the stage is yours. Take it away.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Jacob, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you for the service you're providing with this education program online and everybody's passion for oceans. I always feel excited and comfortable around those that love the ocean like I do. And I've got a series of slides to show and talk to you about what I call the ocean renaissance. But before that, I was asked to show this brief clip. This is from a documentary that was made on me and my life it's currently featured in the San Francisco Film Festival online. I think they've archived it permanently, but somebody said to show the first few minutes of that program to give you a little bit more about me, my background. It's only about 3 minutes long. Then I'll come back and give you the more of the content. Here's the video. Except, there it is.
The ocean is telling us things today. And I think the ocean is telling us that it actually doesn't need us. The ocean is telling us that we need it. We better stop abusing it. It's going to be here in the future. It may be in a slightly different state or a dramatically different state, but it's not going to go away. Our condition is far more vulnerable. The ocean holds all the cards. My name is Greg Stone, and I'm an oceanographer, marine biologist. I study the ocean, and I work every day to save it. I grew up in the outskirts of Boston. I actually didn't live near the ocean, but I was connected to the ocean through TV. I watched Jacques Cousteau documentaries as a kid. And I used to sit there on the living room floor with my mask and flippers on, watching these shows. I used to count the days between Jacques Cousteau documentaries. Finally, I got to the ocean when I was about 7 or 8 years old for the first time, and got to dive into the ocean. Remember, I was with my cousin, and he lived near the ocean, and he had 2 flippers and 2 masks, so we each had 1 flipper and a mask. To this day, I remember the colors of the starfish the bracing, wonderful feeling of being in salt water, the waving fronds of kelp. And I was totally lost and in love with the ocean from that moment forward.
Okay, everybody, I'm back. And again, that's an excerpt from a documentary film, which you can find at the San Francisco International Film Festival online. And that's just a snippet of it. And today I'm very happy to give you a presentation based a large part on a recent book of mine called Soul of the Sea and the Age of the Algorithm that I co-authored with Sean Dignarian. And this is a book that first it reviews past industrializations on the planet and the effect that they had on the ocean, and in some ways what the ocean provided during those industrializations. And then it looks forward, more importantly, to how the ocean is going to become more important to us in the fourth industrial revolution, which is the oncoming one. And we'll talk more about that in the presentation. But if you think about industrializations, you can think about it like we were in the Stone Age, and then we went to the Bronze Age, and then we went to the Iron Age, then we had a long gap, and we sort of entered the age of oil. And now we're entering the fourth industrial revolution, which is considered the age of big data, metals, artificial intelligence, and renewable energy. So hopefully the slides will advance. We were having a little, here we go. Now, I'm a big believer in telling you what I'm going to tell you right off the bat. I'm going to tell you again, and then I'm going to tell you what I told you. So I'm going to tell you what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you what I told you. So the bottom line is that we have to see humanity now as not as a problem, but as a natural evolution of our habitation of the earth. I mean, and we need to manage resources accordingly. We have expanded and colonized this planet so rapidly that our head is still spinning at how this has occurred. And I like to quote a friend and colleague of mine, which gives sort of a guiding principle, Dr. John Delaney from the University of Washington, who has said that it's time that humans be present through sensors or in person throughout the entire volume of the ocean. And what he means by that is we just have to really understand the ocean, and we need to explore it. We need to either be there in a submarine or an ROV or an AUV, these are robots, or have sensors all through the ocean. The time has come for that, and we're far from it because in order to manage our relationship with the ocean, we need to understand it and sense it and be there. So a little bit more about my background. I was inspired by Jaws, and because it was the first time that we had scientists portrayed and also the TV series Sea Hunt, which I don't know, the age of my audience today, I understand might be younger, so you may not remember this, but these were major things that got my attention as a youngster and drove me towards the ocean. We didn't live near the ocean. My family wasn't really involved with the ocean, but these really had a big impact on me. And as soon as I turned 16, I learned how to scuba dive, and now 10,000 dives later and a career in oceanography, I was privileged to be able to realize my dream of having a career and a life mostly on, under, and in the ocean. I started doing quite a bit of expeditionary work starting in the 1980s and 90s, and really I still do it now. This was from an expedition, one of several I did to Antarctica, where we would study the ecology of the ice. Very important feature of the Earth is the ice, very important for the oceans. And in this particular case, we were studying the largest iceberg in history. It was called B-15, and this is from about 20 years ago. And that's me swimming through a crevasse in the iceberg taken by my good friend who's passed away since, Wes Skiles, took that picture. And we were wanting to study the ecology of the iceberg because we're getting more and more icebergs as the ice at the poles are melting more rapidly now with climate change. I also got very interested in underwater mountains, or they're also called seamounts. And I wrote a National Geographic article on this a few years ago. I also wrote a National Geographic article in a book on the Antarctic diving iceberg story. But here is me in a submarine off the coast of Costa Rica in the a volcanic vent of a seamount, and we're about 1,000 feet from the surface and studying the features of seamounts. Seamounts are one of the more important features in the ocean. There's more mountains in the ocean than there are on land, and they are clusters of they provide a platform for biodiversity and a place where animals can orient themselves. This is a picture that I just took about a year and a half ago. I was off the coast of Hawaii exploring some seamounts that had never been explored. They're about 100 miles off the Big Island. And we went down, we had 2 submarines, the University of Hawaii submarines, and we came to rest on the bottom, and this shark came by, and it's a Pacific sleeper shark. Now, you don't find these at the surface. They're only found in very deep water. And I've seen them twice from submarines, this time and then one time before, and at both times they did exactly the same thing. She came over and swam around the sub, laid down. She came in and she looked in the window, right like that. I took that with my phone, actually. She just swam right up, looked in the window at me. And then she sat down, laid down on the seabed next to us, touching the submarine, and then she left. And first time that it happened, I thought it was kind of strange. I didn't understand the behavior, but now that it happened twice, the pattern begins to emerge, and this is often how science starts. You begin to look for patterns. She probably I know she'd never seen a submarine before, so she probably wondered what it was. And these sharks have a brain, the size of a peanut, so they're not all that smart. And she's probably trying to work out whether she could eat the submarine or make a friend of the submarine or what. And once she worked out that neither one of those was going to happen, she left. But an example of what it's like to be in a submarine, what you might see, and also the fact that there's a whole ecosystem of deep sea sharks that live in deep water all around the planet. And I hosted a series of programs for Discovery Channel on sharks. Maybe some of you saw it. The series was called Alien Sharks of the Deep. Another area that I'm quite interested in. These sharks never come to the surface. They only live down many thousands of feet down from the surface in the very deep, cold, abyssal areas. And back to the classroom for a second. What is the ocean? We generally think of the ocean as the salt water out there. I'm pointing because I live in Pacific Palisades, Santa Monica area, and I can see it from where I'm sitting. And we mostly think of the ocean as that salty water out there, but it's actually more than that. The ocean is part of the hydrological cycle on the planet. Every 33,000 years, the equivalent volume of the entire ocean evaporates up into the clouds, and it goes down in the form of rain back to the earth and then back into the ocean. So think of it as a cycle. So there's the salty part. That's what we normally think of as the ocean. But let's expand our definition of the ocean to include even the vapor or the distilled part. Now, when water distills, it leaves the salt behind. So it's actually a purifying process. So you just get pure water evaporating out of the ocean. And then it precipitates in the form of weather, and it comes down. If it's on land, it runs down through rivers and streams, and then it eventually ends up back in the salty part. So I'd like you to think of the ocean from now on, if you would, please try, maybe in your imagination, as the whole cycle, the whole system, because that is what makes the Earth a nice place to live. This is the primary life support system on our planet, and it's time we think about it in its entirety, because if you have a problem on the land part of the ocean through pollution or any number of factors, it's going to impact the open ocean. And we need to look at the system, the whole system, and make sure the system is working properly. So new definition of the ocean today. Now, also seamounts, I mentioned they're important. Let me tell you a little bit why they're important. Most currents in the ocean move horizontally. And when they hit a seamount, you can see these blue lines, they force the water to split and go up and mix. And then on the back of the seamount, you'll see another turbulent area. And those turbulent and these mixed areas are good. They're good in the ocean because it's like tilling a garden. It makes life thrive by releasing nutrients and animals. And if you're in the sunlit zone, plants thrive. So these are very important ecosystems that we should be aware of. There's more mountains in the ocean than there are on land. And we've been to very few of them to date. I've had the privilege of exploring some myself, and it's not easy. When you're on a submarine, it would be like walking up the side of a mountain at night with a flashlight. Is kind of about the view you get. So even though I've been on a couple of these, well, more than a couple, dozen or so seamounts over the years, I've still only walked up one trail, and there's a lot more to explore and see. And that's how you get down to these things currently, is in a deep sea submersible. That submarine there holds 3 people. And that one is a Japanese submarine called the Shinkai 6500, which translated means deep sea 6500. 6,500 meters is its operating depth. And I was diving in that submarine in the early 90s off the coast of Japan. And I saw down at 18,000 feet, and we were exploring a epicenter of a submarine earthquake that had occurred a decade or so before. We were wanting to look at the effects. And we found the epicenter. The mud was all opened up and cracked still. But what struck me more was I found trash and garbage down there. And that's when I turned my career in oceanography more towards conservation. I realized that we were beginning to spoil the planet in places before we'd actually even had a chance to explore it. I know that no one had ever been there before, and it hadn't even seen the light of day for billions of years, yet there was trash down there. So from that point on, I tried to make my work both scientific, but also applied in the sense of finding ways for the ocean and people to support each other in the modern world or the modern age. And one of the functions the ocean provides is circulation. Those arrows you see are water currents, and this is showing us the Gulf Stream in the North Atlantic, and you see it heads up past Bermuda, and then it hits the ice or cold water and sinks because it's dense. This is called the thermohaline circulation system. And when it gets cooler, it sinks, and then it flows back along the deep parts. And this is very important for Europe. It brings Europe all this warmth from the Caribbean. And if we didn't have the Gulf Stream, England would be like Alaska, Norway would be like Antarctica. It's had a really huge impact on civilization. And as we're warming the planet, we're changing these circulation patterns. And that Gulf Stream actually stopped flowing a couple of years ago for about a week. So I'm very concerned about climate change and its impact on the circulation of the water on the planet, because it is the major heat sink and also the major heat distributor, and the controls all the climate at the end of the day is the ocean. And this is a nice visualization of some of the currents that you find in the ocean. And what's in there? This is really what's the ocean, is the animals in the ocean. Most of the 99% of the livable space on the planet is in the ocean. By that, I mean 99, any place where life can live, 99% of it is in the ocean. So if you go from the top of the mountain down to the bottom of the ocean, where life can be, most of it's in the ocean, and most of it looks like this or like this. This is a pelagic sea cucumber that I took a picture of. It's maybe 6 inches long or so. This is a polychaete worm that I co-discovered with colleagues of mine in the Celebes Seas, and it was actually awarded the top 10 new species of the decade, just because it looks so weird. But it's a free swimming worm. It looks kind of like a squid, so we called it squid worm. That was its common name. Its scientific name was something quite different. And we have sea jellies like this one. I call this like a Darth Vader. I don't think it has a common name, but it's a ctenophore, which is a particular kind of sea jelly. And they all live in the water. And that little bubble of water on the Earth is the comparative volume of water to the volume of the Earth. So even though it looks like there's a lot of water out there, compared to the volume of the Earth, there isn't very much at all. And that's the whole ocean right there compared to the volume of the Earth. So just try to think about that for a while and get your head around it. There's not much there. And while we're looking at the Earth in this picture, it doesn't show the atmosphere, but if it did show the atmosphere, it would just be a very thin line around the Earth. And when you begin to see the thin line of the atmosphere and the relatively small volume of the ocean, you can start to understand how our activities have impacted these features, how possible it is for us to impact these features, because they're not all that big compared to the Earth and compared to us as an industrial animal that has the ability to do all these amazing things through our technology. But we need to think about the natural capital of the Earth. We need to think about the life support system of the Earth. At the end of the day, we all depend on natural systems to survive. Most of the oxygen comes from the ocean. The ocean feeds many people, especially poor people in poor countries, provides a lot of jobs. And I know AltaSea is I love AltaSea as an organization because they're always thinking about innovation in ocean businesses and technologies. So our challenge, which AltaSea, and I hope some of the listeners here will take on, is that we have 80 million people joining us every year on this planet, and we're going to go up to close to 10 billion people from around 7.4 or so billion people now by 2050. And how are we going to manage that? We're going to need twice as much of all these things that we use currently. And if we just keep going the way we are, it's not going to work. And even today, there's a day every year, it's called the Earth Overshoot Day, and that's the day at which we have used as much of the resource that the Earth can provide in one year, or we have distributed enough pollution that the Earth can absorb in a year. And it should be, December 31st every year. It should match up, but it keeps moving closer. This year, it's going to be July 29th. So everything after July 29th this year is coming out of the future. And that means that there's a train wreck out there unless we start to stop what we're doing. Here's a sort of a comedic view of evolution, where we came from the sea. All life originated in the sea, and we humans came around and got smart, but not real smart, because we started to pollute the very thing that we depended on. However, we have woken up to that now. So now's the time that we look back and realize what we've done, and we use the same brain and the same penchant for technology that we have, our species has, and we use that to fix what we've done, to change our behavior, to become sustainable, and to become regenerative. One very good technique for this is protected areas. And I've been involved in creating some of the largest protected areas in the world through my work in the Pacific. And I want to show you, this illustrates something important. The green line is protected areas on land over time, starting around 1900. And you can see that it hockey sticks up around in the 60s and 70s. And I think that was largely due to the environmental awareness that happened back then, the hippies and the scuba, the aqualung was invented. around that time by Jacques Cousteau and a colleague of his. But the ocean protected areas is the blue line, and it's kind of flatlined up until around now. It's now been, this says 2008, but it should be higher than that. It's now hockey sticking up. So we're finally trying to catch up with what we've done on land in the ocean. And one of the reasons that it is behind is because you can't see what happens in the ocean. You know, if we could see what happens in the ocean like we can see what happens on land, I'm sure we would have taken measures earlier, because it's the visual impact on humans that makes us respond. And when we started to see problems on land, you know, we responded quickly. And now that we can explore the ocean and we see it through scuba diving and submarines and ROVs and whatnot, we're beginning to protect more areas from human activity. However, we still rely on the ocean for many things. I try to put different names on protected areas. I would say that our goal is to optimize how the ocean supports human well-being, or that they're fish factories, or that they're regeneration zones, as well as marine protected areas. There may be a mixture of uses. And we have to come to the reality, there's so many of us on the planet now. And especially, again, I'll refer to the developing world, the poorer nations, where they rely on the ocean for their food every day. They don't have, a lot of people don't have electricity. They don't have a refrigerator, but they've got the ocean, so they can go out and catch a fish, and that's their fresh food for the day. Here's a spread of marine protected areas as it was a couple of years ago. And it hasn't changed a whole lot since then. There's a lot of proposals around now to make more sense of this and have it be based on some science, some connectivity. These are all based on very opportunistic declarations of protected areas. There's a small rectangle, see if I have a pointer here, I guess I don't, but in the Pacific, there's a one called the Phoenix Islands Protected Area. It's the square box there in the middle of the Pacific. And I was privileged to be involved with the country of Kiribati when they established that. And I gave a TED talk on that. If you're interested, you can go to the TED platform and find that. There's up in Svalbard, it's a island, a big island that's owned by the whole world. Most people don't know this, but it's owned by the whole world, administered by Norway, but Svalbard is actually a common piece of land, like Antarctica is. And in Svalbard, they used to have these coal mines. They mined coal from inside this mountain. And when they stopped coal mining, they turned one of these into a seed vault, because it has very constant temperature and humidity all year long. And somebody got worried that someday, if we had a big problem on the planet and we lost a lot of our agricultural production models, that we'd have to have some place to go to get the seeds. So we actually store, I think there's over 1 million species of plants in the form of seeds in this vault. Some people call it the Doomsday Vault. I guess the idea is that if we had a catastrophe that inhibited the whole planet, some of us would somehow get up to this vault, maybe in a canoe of some sort, and grab some seeds and start over again, or something like that. But that just gives you an idea of how serious that this is. Now, look at that. That's the beautiful Earth that we see from a high orbit of space. It's blue. And you'd think that once we saw that back in the days of the Apollo mission, when they were going around the moon, we would have said, hey, there's, most of our planet's blue. Why aren't we more involved? Why aren't we paying more attention to that blue part? But we didn't. We kept looking up into space, which I'm supportive of. I would have loved to be would have loved to have been an astronaut if I hadn't gone the other direction down as an aquanaut. But we didn't. We sort of kept it aside. And then even when the Voyager spacecraft, it's a spacecraft that was sent up in the 1970s, and it's now heading out of our solar system. And Carl Sagan got them to turn the cameras back as was leaving the gravitational influence of our sun, and take one last picture of the Earth. That's the Earth, that little it's called the famous pale blue dot. If you blow that up, it's only 1 pixel, and that pixel is blue, but we still didn't really get it. However, I believe that we have gotten it now, and I call it the ocean renaissance. In Europe, when we had the famous European Renaissance, it was at a time, it was, I think, roughly speaking, you could say it was the 14, 15, 1600s, that area. I'm not a historian, so excuse me if I've got the dates wrong, but it was the time when we came out of the Dark Ages and we kind of said, well, what do we know? And everybody kind of consolidated what information we had. There was this Library of Alexandria. How many books do we have left from that famous library? And we had roads. We made roads. The Romans made these roads, and people started getting creative, and science arguably was born at that time. The first networks, I would argue, began at that time. And it really kickstarted our civilization to where we are now. It was an important feature, important function. And I believe that's where we are with the ocean. I think we're finally waking up to the fact that, okay, what do we know about the ocean? What have we known? Let's put it together into a big picture. Now, more importantly, what do we do going forward? And we've had some very important agreements recently that have acknowledged this through the United Nations. One is the UN Climate Agreement is now incorporating the ocean finally in their deliberations when they're talking about climate. But it wasn't until this last decade that oceans entered that discussion. There's high seas management discussion going on. All of this occurring, not the climate agreement, but the high seas under the law of the sea. We established the Sustainable Development Goal around the oceans in 2016. So I'm very hopeful that we've now started the global discussion and creating the global framework to deal with the ocean and our future vis-a-vis the ocean. And you can look at it really in these ways at the end of the day. There's materials and energy that we need, there's food, and it's a climate regulator. And remember, as Buckminster Fuller told us, we are on spaceship Earth. And it is a planet that's traveling 67,000 miles per hour around the sun. And if you also calculate in the movement through the universe, we're going millions of kilometers per hour, or millions of miles per hour through the universe. So we are on a spaceship moving around, and we're never going to get resupplied. Everything we ever had, everything we ever will have is here now. So we have to be really smart about how we use things and how we recycle things and how we take care of our environment. So see if hope this isn't getting stuck here. There we go. I'm gonna be winding up here in just a few minutes, but I want to kind of remind us all that we started as a species in Africa, and I'm not an anthropologist, but I know a few, and there's one gentleman who's been doing some research in South Africa, and he found these caves in Mossel Bay that are above the highest sea level marker in the ocean. The ocean sea levels have been going up and down, and anything in the range of the up and down will get washed away. But this cave is above the highest sea level maxima. And he found a place where there was evidence of humans living in this cave 200,000 years ago. And they lived there for about 130,000 years. He keeps digging down into the floor of the cave and discovers that about 200,000 years ago, we came to the coastline. This is the first evidence that we have of humans coming to the ocean and beginning to rely on ocean resources. And it was also at a time when there was some climate change in Africa. The interior, dried up quite a bit. And it was like a bonanza to get to the ocean because there was this very rich protein in the form of invertebrates that could be taken out of the intertidal zone. And these foods were very good for your brain because they have proteins and omega-3 fatty acids, good for your health. So we had a very close relationship with the ocean, at least in this area, a very long time ago. And you could argue that it saved us. a very long time ago, because it was during a point of climate change where we couldn't live as easily on the interior. I also think it probably was an easier place to deal with predators. You know, if you had a big lion chasing you, you could jump in the water and maybe have a better chance of not getting eaten. So, excuse me, drink a little water here to clear my throat. So there is this really fairly recent but interesting connection that we had a long time ago with the ocean. And then we moved out of Africa, and we won't go into all the details of our anthropological history, but it was only in the last 100 years that we finally occupied the whole planet, I would argue, by getting to Antarctica. And now we have people there 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. We're everywhere. We are now a planetary species. We are a dominant species. We are the smartest species in terms of our brain size. And it's a new world. However, I like to look back and see how cultures, any culture that lives by the ocean and has been by the ocean for many thousands of generations, has a lot of knowledge, has a lot of skills, and we can learn a lot from indigenous knowledge and indigenous culture. And I myself have been enormously enriched by indigenous knowledge and culture. And they have systems that are sustainable in how they relate to the ocean. And I think it's time that we scale some of these up, maybe even into the UN. And it was a gentleman named Haldane who pointed out something very interesting, and that is that, this is a picture of me just taken last year in Kiribati, and I'm on the equator. And this gentleman came walking along the beach with his food, and it struck me that this could have happened 200,000 years ago. Very similar thing. He picked these up in the intertidal zone and was taking them home to eat for dinner that night. And here we are again. But this Haldane noted that only we humans can run 20 miles, swim a mile, and then go climb a tree. Now, and you're probably going to say, well, why are you telling me this? Well, it's quite interesting that we have this ability to be comfortable in the ocean and swim and dive, and we're also comfortable on land. So we actually are have a relationship with the ocean on a personal scale, but then on a planetary scale, we need to get that right. And that's the challenge before us. And I am working, that's what I spend my time working on, thinking about it, working on marine protected areas. I also am working on a project where in order to get to a renewable energy future, we're going to need a lot of batteries. There's 1.5 billion cars on the planet, and the idea is to electrify them all someday. And if we electrify, the target is to get 1 billion of them electrified by 2050. We're going to need 500 to 1,000 times more of certain types of metal that are used in batteries. Cobalt, manganese, and nickel are some of them. And we can't make these metals. They're only made in the hearts of stars. So we have to take them from the earth, and we have to be very careful when we take resources out of the earth, because remember, it's this spaceship that can't get resupplied. Traditionally, we've taken them from land, but terrestrial mining is a very destructive process. You're tearing up the ground. You're often moving communities. A lot of people die in the process of mining on land. And you'll read about these mining tailings disasters every few years, where tailings lets go, and all this water and pollution comes down and kills hundreds of people sometimes. It happened in Brazil about 3 or 4 years ago. There is a solution out in the ocean. There are these, they're called polymetallic nodules. I've got one in my hand right here. And in an area less than 1% of the seafloor, in the middle of the Pacific, these just sit on the bottom of the ocean, and they're a very high grade of nickel, manganese, copper, and cobalt, and and other things in it as well. And these can be picked up, processed with almost zero waste, and they use a lot less carbon to pick them up and process them and transport them, and is I think a viable and better option than digging more of the land up, because we've already taken most of the high-grade ores deposits, and if we meet this oncoming demand that we have with the fourth industrial revolution and renewable energy, we have to be smart on a planetary basis of where we get this. And it's, a lot of people think it's kind of contradictory that I'm devoted my life to the oceans as a conservationist, yet I'm promoting ocean, the recovery of these metals from the ocean, because I think it's actually better for the ocean long term if it gets us to a renewable energy future quicker, and it helps us get a hold of this warming climate. So I think I'm going to wind things down there and give you some chance for question and answer, if that sounds good to you, Jacob. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds great. Thank you so much, Dr. Greg Stone. And we'll dive right into the questions because we got a couple. John asks, we've witnessed a resilience in our oceans during this time of lockdown. As the economy and people return to their pre-COVID life, how do we remain optimistic for the future, especially with an administration of science deniers?
Well, it's a great question. And I think we're all experiencing this together. And it's variously stressful, variously lonely, but also it's a time of thought and consideration. So I can tell you on my journey is it's given me time to think more, and I'm optimistic that after this virus passes, that I'm not going to need to travel as much, because we've come up with this kind of format is now much more comfortable. Everybody's kind of been forced into it, whereas before we were so used to gathering together and flying all over the world that we kept that up. I think that's going to fundamentally change how we convene and communicate. I'm optimistic about that. The need to pay attention to science is very important. Science is a system of rules that keeps us from lying to each other, is how one of my professors once told me how to define it. So it's really important that we have globally and nationally decision makers that listen to science, and I think it's the voice in our democracy of people like you that has to be heard. And vote. Get out there and vote, everybody. People died. A lot of people died for the right to vote here. I have ancestors that fought in the war in the United States. They didn't die. They made it through it. But I have a real connection to that personally, and a lot of Americans don't bother voting. It's a real privilege, and that's how you change. That's how you remain optimistic. Thank you.
Awesome. Jack asks about the Gulf Stream stopped flowing. Were there any immediate impacts that could be seen or measured during that week when the Gulf Stream stopped flowing?
Not. It's a very good question, and not to my knowledge. It was one of those things where somebody kind of noticed it, like afterwards, because it kicked up again and kept going. But it's a warning that the Gulf Stream is a very delicate oceanographic feature, but a very important one. It's delicate because it's a fairly narrow river within the ocean, and it's in the North Atlantic, which is it's a small, relatively small ocean. It's also like a cul-de-sac. It's one of the few places where the ocean kind of hits a barrier; it can't go anywhere. And it's fairly easy that the Gulf Stream has gone on and off over the millennia. It's been going strong for the last 200,000 years, which has made one of the reasons that civilization has been able to thrive the agricultural revolution occurred because of the mild climate the Gulf Stream brought to Europe. But it is conceivable that it could stop, and we'd start to feel the effects within certainly a decade or probably less. So it's something we really have to pay attention to.
Okay. Kip had a comment about the visual of the volume of water. He said it was fantastic to show how little there is, because we always hear the earth is made up of 70% of water, which kind of led me into a question I was thinking, the increase in population will need 2 times the water you said. So how will we be able to sustain that that water supply throughout and during 2050?
Well, I don't know all the answers myself. So water is not one of my specialities, but I think we got to get a lot better at not wasting it. We're so spoiled in countries like the United States, where we flush the toilet all these times during the day, and we let the water run when it shouldn't run, and water conservation. I think we're probably going to make strides in desalination. You can desalinate seawater and get fresh water that way, but you've got to make sure that when you desalinate it, there's a problem that you can't just put the salt back into the ocean, because it causes, believe it or not, it causes salt pollution. It's too much salt. So you've got to do that carefully. There is a way to manage through it. And again, this is part of this 4th industrial revolution, where we use our brains, the same brains that got us into this problem, we're going to use to get us out of this problem. We can solve these if we focus in on it through our brains. The kind of things that AltaSea supports, I think, is a great place to start.
Jenny asks, what are the good steps to make the Earth Overshoot Day December 31st instead of July 29th?
Well, it's everything. It's producing less CO2. It's being better at water conservation, as we mentioned. It's anything that comes from the earth, or it's also related to pollution. There is a certain amount of pollution that the earth can absorb, right? If you have a cabin out in the middle of the woods somewhere, and you have an outhouse, a septic system that you use at a certain amount, that human waste will go into the ground and it'll get absorbed into the system. And there's a certain amount that it's okay in that way. But if you have it all piled up in one place, like I used to live in Boston, and I was there before they put the sewage treatment plant in, and I was there when there was raw sewage was flowing out into Boston Harbor. It was unbelievable, and that didn't work. So what they did is they built a big plant. It wasn't tertiary. It didn't have 3 treatment cycles. It only had 2, and then it had a pipe that would take the secondarily cleaned sewage out, like 20 miles out underwater, and then let it go. And hopefully that was deep enough that it was the dilution would, the ocean could absorb it. But I haven't tracked it, and it's not my specialty. But it's things like that. It's finding those places where we're either putting too much in or taking too much out, and modulating it.
Awesome. Jim asks, in your book, The Soul of the Sea, you suggest that the 4th Industrial Revolution is providing technologies that can help in devising and experimenting with solutions to major ocean problems and to managing outcomes, and that these technologies can help us move away from efforts that are isolated or siloed within governments, businesses, and NGOs, big and small, individual scientists, and others. Can you give us an idea of how the 4th Industrial Revolution can help us collaborate better in finding solutions to the hard problems of overfishing, pollution, biodiversity loss, food security, etc.?
Sure. I can give you one. How about if I give you an example of one that's just happened that I think is a result of this thinking. If you go to a website called aqualink.org, aqualink.org, this was started by someone I know, a friend of mine. He came with me on an expedition to install temperature loggers on a reef system out in the middle of the Pacific right before an El Nino was coming through. An El Nino is an oceanographic event where the water gets hot. And they're not periodic. I mean, they are periodic, but they're not exact. They happen every 3, 4, 5, or 6 years. So you can't predict exactly when, but you know there's going to be one coming. And a couple of years ago, I saw the water heating up, and I had to get out there. So we flew out. It was hard to get there. We had to charter a plane, land on this little island, dove down, and used a pneumatic drill that I bought at Home Depot, which means it's powered by air off my first stage of my regulator. And I drilled a hole in the reef, had a bolt, which I put in with this underwater sealant. And then I put the temperature logger, which is about the size of this battery here. And it records the temperature every 30 seconds for 2 years. We have to go back and recover it. And after we finished, he said to me, "Is that the state of the art in oceanography for getting this kind of information?" And I said, "I'm afraid it is." And he said he's kind of Silicon Valley, high-tech world thinking. And he couldn't believe it. He said it was like a modern physician going back in time to the Stone Age, how we were acquiring this detailed information on the coral reef. So he started Aqualink. And what he did is he designed and created these buoys that are reasonably priced, or I think he was even making the first round of them available for almost nothing, where there'd be a buoy with a solar collector for electricity, a line that goes down to a sensor, gives you the temperature, a picture, and you can put other sensors on it. And he immediately got like 400 applicants for this. And suddenly he's like, that potentially could create a sensing system right along the lines of what my book predicted, a low cost, kind of maybe citizen scientist oriented, also professional scientists, and now we're back to one of the original statements of John Delaney, it's time for the human presence to be everywhere, right? We have to be able to sense things. That's a great kind of workaround from the way we've done it in the past, which was very time intensive and difficult. And by the way, those pneumatic drills that you get at Home Depot only work for about 2 bolt screws underwater until you have to get another one, because they're not designed to be used underwater. So there's one example. I could give you others, but it's that kind of thinking that we have to start doing.
We have a couple more because we want to be sensitive to your time. Lance asks, what impact, good or bad, do you think the COVID pandemic will have on the ocean?
Gosh, it's a good question. The honest answer is I don't know. I can only say anecdotally that people say, I haven't seen any data, but people say that because there's been less human activity around the coastline, that wildlife has gotten more active, but it could just be misperception. I don't have a clear answer for that. I mean, we could talk about viruses and life and small life and what they are and how, and I mean, that's an interesting topic. And I have a podcast, by the way, everybody, called The Sea Has Many Voices, theseahasmanyvoices.com. And I do talk about the viruses during one of those podcasts, but please tune into that and subscribe. I have a lot of different kinds of people on the show. It's designed to be diverse. That's why it's called The Sea Has Many Voices. I stole that from T.S. Eliot, but
okay, we have two more, just quick ones. Mary asks, where in the US is there investment in desalination, if any?
I don't know. I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that either. I've heard sort of through the grapevine that Southern California, there's some work on it. I believe in Mexico there's been some work on it, but it's not an area that I know about.
Okay. Then just a general question: if there are high schoolers in here or college kids in here that wanted to get that are interested in getting involved in this field, what would you recommend? Are there any organizations you'd recommend volunteering at? College majors that will be helpful for this field? Clubs, organizations? Any advice for them?
Yeah, just take every opportunity you can, and if it's volunteer at first and you can afford it, volunteer. But if you're interested in this area, this career area, just like I was, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. There's nothing else I could do. And don't get distracted. Just keep going. I know that it's financially can be an issue, but even if you have to volunteer. And if you can't find a job and you can't find a volunteer, but you can afford to go to college, get into a graduate program, get into an undergraduate program. School's a great place to be while you're waiting for the perfect job.
Perfect. Well, hey, I think that answers. We got to most of them, but we hit the hour mark. So I just want to thank you. This was awesome. This was a great lecture. And remind everyone that this will be available. This recording will be available at altasea-project-blue.org. And on that site as well, you can find our application process for any high school volunteer opportunities. AltaSea is having a research volunteer program with Oregon State National History Museum and Holdfast Aquaculture, who will be serving as mentors to 12 high school students as they conduct research in ocean energy, ocean exploration, and sustainable aquaculture. And that is all on altasea-project-blue.org. So, hey, thank you so much, Dr. Gregory Stone. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Enjoyed it. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, everybody, for listening to me, and hoping I meet you all someday. Bye-bye.
Talk to you guys later.